So today's lecture number 5. It's part 1 of section 2 of the second part of this whole Relevance series, Ocean Church and Substantive Plan. So it's about the history of Ocean Church and True Father's heart today. So first we'll start off with a quote that True Father talks about how this world can be divided. How this divided world can be united. He says, how is unity achieved? How shall I achieve unity? Through what? Through brute force, power, money, authority, or knowledge? Everything can be resolved only at a place based on love. In God's Will in the Ocean, he also says, this is the fastest way to bring people and nations together. I'm always thinking how this can be done, and that is why I am making a foundation on the ocean. And when we make this foundation, our direction toward the future will be straight. So what is he saying in these two quotes? He's basically saying that in order to achieve unity, basically what we need to do is to, we have to be at a place based on true love, right? And that's basically living for the sake of others true. And we also, we discovered through the previous presentations that Ocean Providence was basically this way to substantially live for the sake of others. And that was basically a method of unity. And he also says that our direction following this Ocean Providence will be straight, and it would be the fastest way to bring people and the nations together. And ultimately, we will be able to achieve that peace where there is no division or starvation. So this is, review number 1, right? So we kind of showed this, purpose, plan, current situation, and action previously. But the reason why we show it again multiple times is because it's important to understand, right? We cannot make appropriate decisions right now, currently, without first understanding True Parent's purpose. The purpose of Ocean Providence. Why was he doing it? Why, is it important? The plan, what exactly was supposed to happen, and also the current situation of it, right? What needs to be done now. So the purpose becomes clear by first knowing the motivation and also the heart of True Parents and understanding the hunger problem that they're trying to resolve and how desperate the situation is, right? And then the plan can then be understood by analyzing True Father's words and his actions and where he invested in the past. And our current situation can be understood by knowing the history and through analyzing how far the plan has come and where it has failed. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today, right? That current situation, understanding and knowing that history of Ocean Providence and analyzing how far it has come and what places it may have failed. So we also learned, right, that Ocean Church was basically this method to live for the local town, the local city. And Ocean Providence, right, the expansion of Ocean Church was basically a method to live for the sake of the nation, right, of the world, a global method to live for the sake of the world. And that was basically the resolution to the global food issue. So Ocean Church was basically a path to contribute to the local town and region's social issues, while Ocean Providence is also, a path to contribute to the national and global level social issues. So it was a path to basically unite by living for the sake of others. In part 2, section 1, where we talk about, what is Ocean Church and why should we trade on the ocean? That was the last one. We looked exclusively at True Father's words on figuring out, the theoretical and the ideal form, this desire and hope that True Father had for the functions of Ocean Church. So this concept of Ocean Church is really revolutionary, right? This idea to use boats to fulfill the functions of social contribution, business, and mission, right? And True Father wanted this model, this ideal Ocean Church model that could contribute socially, could carry out businesses, and could carry out God's mission to be globalized as the center of Ocean Providence throughout the world. And the leaders of the new era who were trained in Ocean Church were to globalize that Ocean Church fishery business, ocean hobby tourism industry in order to solve the hunger problem throughout the world. Above was one part of the grand plan, right? That is Ocean Providence. So in this episode, what we're going to be talking about today we will be discussing what the actual history of the Ocean Church was up to this point, right? So in order to understand the current situation, as we mentioned before, it is an important topic to understand. So let's begin. Right? So episode is part 1 of section 2.2. In this presentation, we will be talking about the first 2 points here. Number 1, what happened with Ocean Church and its history. And number 2, the setbacks of Ocean Church and True Father's lamentation about it. There are other sections, other parts, right? What was it like? A combination of Ocean Church, but those are going to be talked about next, the following presentation. So point number 1, right? First of all, we should look at the brief history of the Ocean Church that was started in North America. So what exactly happened with the Ocean Church, right? We understood, the idealized version, this hope that True Father had for Ocean Church, but what actually happened with Ocean Church? So this is kind of like a timeline that shows like the brief history of the American Ocean Church timeline, right? So in the beginning, right, August 1st, 1974, that was the beginning of the American Ocean Providence and also the 20-year course. In 1980, there was the development and completion of the One Hope boats. In October 1st, True Father declares Ocean Church to be established in 30 different locations throughout the United States. 1981 summer, Ocean Challenge starts, and 30 Ocean Churches, were launched in the 80s, but eventually, we're going to be talking about how they began to close down. In the 90s, one Ocean Church location, Liberty Harbor Marina in particular in New Jersey, had actually grown significantly. Again, we'll be talking about that more. So yeah, we'll be continuing to talk about this timeline all the way until around 2009, where, it talks about really, about the recession of not just like in America's economy, but also just Ocean Church in general. So let's begin. So Ocean Providence in the United States of America had begun with True Father, giving this prayer to God upon the water. He said, I look at the vast ocean resources as God's blessing waiting for the unification church. I have promised to God, give me 20 years time and we will conquer the sea, taking dominion over it and returning the glory to you. That is how I think every time I go out. Later, we will establish a great foundation. Even the Ford or Rockefeller foundations will look like peanuts in comparison. That is the way we must realistically feel. So on August 1st, 1974, a True Father had promised God that he would build an oceanic foundation in the next 20 years following that prayer and launch to the North American Ocean Providence officially. So officially, right, the United States American Ocean Providence, began on August 1st, 1974, when True Father offered that prayer upon New Hope off the coast of Boston. However, during that time, he had already actually purchased several boats before this prayer and had already begun fishing on the Hudson and Boston. I think it's supposed to be Gloucester, not Boston, but yeah. Anyway, Massachusetts, right? And after training himself, and during that time, he kept training himself, and he continued to train himself in tuna fishing. And eventually, once he finished training himself, he began teaching the UTS students about fishing as well. Right? This is one of the very many images and photos, historical photos of True Father teaching seminary students how to fish using nets. Then in 1978, he began to design boats, develop and design specifically the One Hope boat, right? The unsinkable boat, the very famous boat that he designed. And at this time, the boats were not to be sold in the general market, right? It wasn't yet, going to be sold, but at the time, it was solely for the sake of training the members. And in 1980, this training boat, One Hope, was completed, right? And up to 150 of this model had been manufactured. After the completion of that boat on October 1st, 1980, True Father eventually established the Ocean Church. And, at the time, he had decided and instructed that that there be Ocean Church in 30 different locations in the United States. And at the time, the plan was to deploy 10 One Hope boats per location. That means 300 boats throughout the United States. Now, this is an actual photo of the map that True Father had marked with all the different locations he wanted Ocean Church to be. So as you can see, it's all over the coast, some even inland. Now, in the last episode, right, we had read True Father's words and saw that his plan had been to expand Ocean Church, not just to 30, but eventually to 535. And not just, he didn't even stop there. He also wanted all those locations to even be spread and expanded all throughout the world. However, we know that despite this great hope, the first 30 locations did not take off as he had hoped, right? We can see that as, we look around America today and there is clearly a lack in Ocean churches. So around 1986, we have, many records showing that Ocean churches had existed in New York, Montauk, Miami, Jacksonville, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, San Diego, Norfolk, and many others, right? But one by one, eventually, Ocean church branches had, begun stopping their activity. Of course, and in the end, eventually the Liberty Harbor Marina branch in New Jersey was the only majorly active one left. So True Father had begun to focus specifically on this, right, this one location, and started going out fishing from this harbor out to New York Harbor because, many of the other ones had, stopped being active. So he focused on the one that was continuing to go on. So we'll continue more, get into more detail about specifically the New York Harbor and the Liberty Harbor Marina more later. But this is, the place where the model of the Ocean Church was basically built under the management of True Father. So in 1994, August 1st, the end of the 20 years, that 20-year period where he had promised God that he would lay that oceanic foundation in America, he laments, in his speech there. He says, "I started Ocean Church Providence 20 years ago, but only I am left at the end. Everyone threw it out on the way and disappeared somewhere. The next 20 years will be your time," right? And he's talking to the unificationists. So despite many setbacks, right, True Father attempted to globalize the Ocean Providence that he cultivated in North America. Starting in 1995, he began the South American Ocean Providence, and True Father began to ship out boats to 160 nations around the world. So even though, he noticed, right, that Ocean Church wasn't being launched as he had hoped in America, he continued on with Ocean Providence and, began to ship out those boats to all over the world. So True Father sent those boats to 160 countries around the world, with this aim to globalize the Ocean Providence, right? He kept wanting to globalize Ocean Providence. However, many members throughout the world lacked this, understanding, this clear understanding of the Ocean Providence, of True Father's goals, of his intentions, and some even refused to accept the boats because of that. So ultimately, most of these boats that were sent around the world from True Father, were either eventually abandoned or sold. Starting in 1995, True Parents began to invest heavily into South America. Every day, they went fishing together with members from around the world in the hinterlands of Jardim, Nabileke, and others. In 2004, True Father had ordered the mission change, this mission switch between Ocean Church leadership in North and South Americas, and instructed members of the Ocean Church in New Jersey to take responsibility for the South American Ocean Providence in this, hope and desire that foundation that was made in North America could be brought to South America. However, not many members not many members actually ended up going to South America. And as a result of this, True Father's expectations for this transfer of Ocean Providence Foundation to South America had not come to fruition. Then in 2005, the newly appointed leaders of the North American Ocean Providence, moved the boat factory from New Jersey, which was, positioned near True Parents' residence so that it was accessible, right? But that boat factory had been repositioned to North Carolina, which was a lot further away. And then in 2008 and 2009, during the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy, when a lot of people were being laid off throughout the country, also the boat factory, which began in 1978, was also affected heavily, was virtually closed, and many of the Ocean Church members located in North America were also laid off. So, all that progression, right, all that piling up of these different, challenges, right, In this way, the primary Ocean Church Foundation in North America, that began with True Father's great hope, great desire, right, was virtually lost. So that's basically, this timeline from, August 1st, 1974 to 2009, right? And it's really, really sad to see this progression because, as we've seen in many of the previous presentations, True Father had such a great hope, for Ocean Church, right? He really desired Ocean Church to take off, but as we can see, things didn't go well, right? So, yeah, as I said, right, Ocean Church began with this great expectation, but the foundations for the Ocean Church in the United States was largely lost, and the successful globalization could not happen. But now, let's take a look at how True Father himself might have felt during this process. During this kind of downward process of the Ocean Church Foundation. Okay, let's take a look at that through his words. So, the decline of Ocean Church and True Father's lament. Now, this is a side note, but this is really not for us to get disappointed, feel resentment toward any of the members in the past, right? Self-deprecation for ourselves, right? Criticism, regret. We shouldn't be feeling any of that, right? Not even repentance, right? But the point of this presentation is really for us to understand the current situation and, so that we can understand exactly what we need to do, what we need to avoid, and what we can do for the future, right? To come up with the next action step. So let's take a look at True Father's words. So why is Ocean Church? So first I want to ask, why is Ocean Church and Ocean Providence not very well known, right? I'm sure many of you are wondering that, right? Because we've been looking, a lot at Ocean Church within Ocean Providence, and we hear all these grand things about Ocean Church and the True Father's plan for it, but many people have not heard about it. Even within North America, where True Father fished a lot and invested a lot into fishery industry, people, especially young people today, do not know about this term Ocean Providence, right? About this province in general. And this is also the same in South America and many other places throughout the world. Why do you think this is the situation? Here, let's try tracing the history through looking at True Father's words towards these circumstances. So in 1963, True Father talks about members' reactions to Ocean Church, Ocean Providence. This is in his autobiography. He says, "I launched the boat with the belief that in a similar way to how we receive life from water, we need to go out onto the ocean and pass through a series of trials there in order to become capable of surviving the trials we will face on land. Chonseung-ho was an exceptional boat. It sailed throughout the Yellow Sea and caught many fish. The reaction of many, though, was that we had enough to do on land and that there was no need for us to be going out onto the ocean and catching fish. I sensed, however, that the world was about to enter an oceanic era. The launching of Chonseung-ho was so small, it was a small but precious first step in opening that era." So this is basically when True Father had officially started Ocean Providence globally in Korea, when he launched the Chonseung-ho boat. And he notes, that many people's reactions, many members' reactions thought that it was kind of a waste of time because they thought, that there was already a lot to do on land. So why do we need to focus on something on the ocean, right? So people basically didn't understand True Father's intentions by it. Also in 1963, he mentions the members in Korea did not like the ocean or the boat. He says, "From the 1960s, I began taking interest in the ocean. I have been in the ocean industry for 22 years. In 1963, I designed and built the boat of Heavenly Victory. I had Woo Hyo-min and Woo Hyo-yeon work at sea so that the boat could ride the 5 oceans, but they did not like the sea. The boat of Heavenly Victory was made in 1963, but Woo Hyo-yeon did not like boats, water, or the waves. When a storm comes, you should be able to enjoy riding waves the size of houses in the sea. He should have become a man who could find value in what he was doing, even if he were to die. But he said that he was afraid and that he did not like the sea. If we had advanced to Alaska from that time, we could rapidly have developed worldwide." On this same point, True Father says, in 1963, we built a boat and called it Chonseung-ho. It means heaven's victory. I named it that to signify my determination that God's will be done. After building the Chonseung-ho, I talked about becoming a power in the oceans of the world. Many members did not like riding on the boat. They would say, we cannot go out today. The waves are too high. But can a true fisherman back down like that? Until life is gone from his body, a fisherman must go out regardless. I became a true fisherman. I paid no attention to rain or snow. I fished in heavy downpours. I would fish until evening, even when it rained. So True Father, he had this heart to go out fishing, right? Despite the rain, despite bad weather, despite the dangers, he went out fishing because, not just because it was like hobby or because he, enjoyed the activity, but because he was doing it for a bigger purpose. And the fact that, members were telling him that they did not like it, that meant that they weren't seeing the bigger picture, right? That they were thinking about their own personal preferences. Then after 1972, after he started the United States, right, American Ocean Providence, he also mentions, many U.S. members also did not like the boat. He says, the name of our ship was New Hope, and it was well known for being able to catch many fish. I took that boat out myself and caught tuna. People were often afraid of getting on boats. When I suggested to young people that they get on a boat, their first reaction was often one of fear. I get seasick, I often heard them say. All I have to do is get on a boat and I start getting woozy and feel like I'm going to die. So I got on the boat myself first. The True Father was basically setting this example for younger people in America, for all the members, in general, setting this example as he used his own body to go out fishing, that he can overcome that kind of, that fear of the ocean. In 1982, many members ran away from Ocean Church, True Father said. He says, I have seen many members run away from the ocean. Our reason for fishing is not just economic. We have to fish, we have to continue on. We have to set the tradition. In 1982, True Father's instructions had not been relayed from leaders to members, and he mentions this in God's Will in the Ocean. He says, so far, no matter how clear and creative the directions were, they have not been digested and accepted. The message dwindled with each step, from the leadership to the members, until it no longer made sense when it got to the members. However, the leader who moves from CARP to Ocean Church and then to state leadership can understand and respond to my direction. They will be like a special task force, ready to respond and go wherever they hear new directions. So according to True Father's words here, within the movement itself at the time, it seems like True Father's instructions that he gave had not been fully conveyed to the members. But through Ocean Church, he saw that if he trained members through Ocean Church, then those members would faithfully understand and put into action his instructions. So many people actually, even today, right, who actually trained in Ocean Church and understood True Father's intentions, actually continue to do Ocean Church activities today. However, overall, as a whole, right, many people were not able to do so in the past. In 1984, True Father, he talks about how he felt deeply disappointed. He says, we should have built 300 boats for this purpose, but you were not ready to receive them. You even didn't want 10 boats in your centers. You said, oh, Father, we only need one boat. Don't send us any more boats. I was deeply disappointed. Where did this disillusionment come from? You should have more hope than any other church project. You lost your hope because you didn't follow instructions. So in these words again, right, True Father seems to express the situation where the members weren't able to follow his instructions, and because of that, they couldn't, fulfill a certain standard that he had for Ocean Church. This hope, right, this great hope that he had for Ocean Church. In 1985, he says that, many members escaped from Ocean Church. Right? He says many Americans like that kind of seafood, and I knew that. So I pioneered and developed every aspect by myself. Then I had to convince the members. He had to convince members, right? I watched many of them escape from Ocean Church during these past 5 years, but I kept on going. I kept going on. In 1986, many people weren't able to understand his goal, his desire, and his hope, and members ended up running away from, this boat. True Father says, I know that in the future sometime in each of the 50 states, even if they have to sell their Capitol building in order to buy one of these boats, they will do that. But now some unification members feel like they don't even want to look at these boats, that they want to run away from their boat. I see that kind of thing. My goal and desire and hope is built into this boat, but the young American members don't understand this, and sometimes they try to run away from this boat. So True Father is saying that, his goal, his desire, his hope, his aspiration, this intention that he had was built into the One Hope boats, and yet members weren't able to grasp that, and because of that, they didn't want to see that boat even, right? They wanted to run away from the boat. In 1994, True Father, ends up saying, only I am left at the end, at the year of the 20-year course. He says, I started Ocean Church Providence 20 years ago, but only I am left at the end. Everyone threw it out on the way and disappeared somewhere. The next 20 years will be your time. Are you all ready to go this way? So in 1994, after that 20-year period of, American Ocean Providence, True Father was still lamenting this fact that many members had run away from Ocean Church and could not, establish the foundation that he had hoped for. At the end of 1994, his expectation and the hope for the second generations. So at the end of 1994, he gave this message to second generation members in East Garden, where he, told them his expectation and hope for the second generations. But that expectation could not come to fruition. The first generation members, he says, had not believed in True Father and opposed me for 40 years. Now the second generation members are approaching our homeland. You must establish the foundation of ideal family, tribe, nation, world, and the cosmos in our homeland. Even in such difficult circumstances, I established a global foundation. World leaders would also recognize this. You must connect to True Father's foundation and exert a powerful influence on the whole world. This is the mission of you second generation blessed children. So before True Father had begun those South American Providence, under the second 40-year course in 1995, he had held, these high hopes and expectations for the second generation members, right? But at the time, many of them also ended up leaving, right? So note that about the South American Providence, we will be focusing that more in part 5 of this series. Then in 1996, members were not able to understand. Leaders were even preventing True Father from going out on the ocean. True Father says around the world, 20 million people die of starvation each year. How can we save them from dying? I do not go fishing for fun. When I fish, I gaze at the ocean and think about those 20 million people who live across that great ocean. I have to open the way to save them, even if it means offering my own flesh and blood. No one has ever considered this. Fishing is my strategy to take time to think about them. That is why I am trying to catch a lot of fish from the ocean and distribute them. Without the ocean, there is no way to save the starving people. Although I am almost 80 years old, I still make time to go fishing, even in rain or snow. All the church leaders try to run away, making excuses and doing whatever they can to prevent me from going fishing. They do that because they do not understand why I am doing it. So he says clearly, right, that the leaders at the time, were preventing him from going fishing, were not supporting his efforts for Ocean Providence because they could not understand why he was doing it. In 1998, he wonders, right, will he or she continue it? Will someone in the future continue on this province? Since I continue living this kind of life, some people may think I go out to the ocean because I like it. Sometimes I feel, what is there to like about the ocean? Yet still I go, and everyone should be like me. I may not go out to the sea now as much as I used to, but before I die, I must pass the spirit on to others. If I die without passing it on, everything will come to a halt. If I pass it on to someone, will he or she continue it? In 2004, members were asking True Father, what's the use of doing that? What's the use of Ocean Providence? He says, you unificationists must fulfill your responsibility to lead them and care for these people. You should go to the developing nations and become instructors and teachers at kindergartens, elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, and universities. You should improve standards by teaching them the most modern agricultural methods. This is how you can save people who would otherwise starve to death. They first need to know how to fish effectively. This is why I sent 4 boats each to 160 nations. You are thinking, what's the use of doing that? Because your hearts and minds are not enlightened. But I am telling you that we must do it. So from the beginning, to the end, there were many members who could not love and understand the ocean and the boats. You would see things like they did not like the boats, many members ran away from the ocean, and all these different phrases, right, that you see in True Father's words throughout this time period, right? When we look at these words in this way, all the way from 1963 when Chonseung-ho had been built, members in general seem to refuse to like oceans and boats, and essentially fail to understand the importance of them for decades. Why couldn't we understand True Father? Right? Why is it that members couldn't like the Ocean Providence or ocean boats? Why was it that they ran away? Why was it that they couldn't understand? Why was it that their minds were not enlightened? Right? For decades, we find that True Father had used such expressions on many occasions. Why couldn't we as a whole, as unificationist members, understand True Father, who had gone fishing ceaselessly, trained us repeatedly, and determined to resolve the food problem through the Ocean Providence and realize world peace? Doesn't that mean that we were not able to unite with God and true parents' perspective? Where do you think the eyes of true parents are looking to? Right? We always talk about uniting with true parents' viewpoint, with God's viewpoint. But where is that viewpoint? Where are they looking for? True Father says, the problems of the world aren't so important to you. There are situations today in some countries where millions and millions of people are starving. Can you understand that? No, cannot understand that. What I have to do is connect the better side of this world to the spiritual world. And then I have to turn my eyes down into the deepest hell, and I have to pay attention to the most miserable situations. I have to solve that whole thing. So the eyes of true parents of God are always facing toward the most miserable situation in the world. Perhaps we aren't able to fully match our eyes with true parents' point of view, right? Perhaps we aren't looking toward that deepest hell. But our eyes should look toward where true parents are looking, right? True Father says, when I look at the world situation, I feel that securing sufficient food supplies is the most pressing problem. We cannot afford to be apathetic just because we and our immediate families are not facing danger, facing hunger. So a real parent, suffers more from the suffering of their children than from their own, right? To know the heart of the parent, one has to know the suffering of the children. In order to understand true parents' heart, we have to understand the suffering of the people in this world. So the hearts of the parents of humankind cannot be fully understood unless we know humankind's most miserable suffering, the deepest hell. And one of the most miserable conditions a human can experience, as we mentioned before, is hunger. And people who are united, truly united with true parents in God's heart and perspective, are those who actually feel that all of humanity are their brothers and sisters, and that they genuinely feel that those problems that they are experiencing are our own, and we have to try to resolve. So this is the end of part 1 of section 2.2. The history of Ocean Providence and the background history of Ocean Providence and kind of True Father's lamentation, and the reason just really this seeming like the, we were talking so much about True Father's ideals, right? True Father's hopes and aspirations, and now we're talking about these failures, these things that didn't go well, right? So that was basically part 1, right? What we talked about today. What happened with Ocean Church, the setbacks of Ocean Church and his lamentation. But, while it has been very, down, depressing, next episode will be part 2, where we will be covering, what was the one successful implementation of Ocean Church in 1990s. What was it like, right? There was actually, there were many failures, but there were also successes. There were also victories. Right? And one of those was the successful implementation of Ocean Church in 1990, which was the New Jersey Ocean Church at the time. So we will be discussing that in detail, and also the culmination of Ocean Church and, what exactly Ocean Hobby Industry Base is. So that's what we're going to be talking about next time. So thank you for listening. Bye.